I signed over a check every single month for 10 months, covered a debt that wasn't mine to carry, and sat at my own dining room table on Easter Sunday while my daughter-in-law looked me dead in the face and told the room I was the reason her husband had no confidence. And I want you to know that was not even the sharpest thing that happened before the ham was finished. Welcome back to Dad's Honest Revenge. Get comfortable. The people in these stories made their choices with both hands. Drop a comment below and make sure you're subscribed. You are going to want to be here for this one. I have hosted 43 Easter dinners. I know that because Margaret kept a journal, and after she passed, I found every single one of them documented in her handwriting, right down to what dessert she made and who said grace. 1987. Peach cobbler, my father said grace, it rained all afternoon. 2019. Lemon pound cake. My son Nathan said grace. The dog got into the deviled eggs before anyone sat down. I have read that journal more times than I can count, not because I'm stuck in the past, but because it reminds me what a table full of people who love each other actually sounds like. It sounds like noise. It sounds like arguing about nothing. It sounds like someone laughing too loud, and someone else telling them to keep it down, and the dog hoping this is the year he finally gets lucky with the deviled eggs. This Easter did not sound like that. Before I tell you what happened, I need you to understand something about my daughter-in-law, Amber. Not because I want you to dislike her. I actually want you to resist that, at least for now. Because Amber is not a simple person, and simple explanations for complicated people are almost always wrong. By the time I finish this story, you are going to feel something about her that you are not expecting to feel right now. I know that because I didn't expect to feel it either. Amber had been married to my son Nathan for 7 years. She was 35, sharp-looking, the kind of person who always appeared to be in the middle of accomplishing something. She worked in marketing, knew exactly how things were supposed to look, and had a particular talent for arranging situations so that she appeared to be at the center of them. She brought a charcuterie board to Easter dinner. Now, I want to be fair. I want to be the kind of man who simply appreciates the gesture. But the board had approximately 12 grapes, a small pile of crackers, and a wedge of cheese I did not recognize, and she carried it in like she was presenting evidence of something. She set it on the counter with both hands, stepped back, and looked at it the way an artist looks at a finished painting. I made that from scratch, she said to nobody in particular, though she was looking at my other son's wife, Diane. Diane is from Minnesota. Diane had brought 3 pies, a green bean casserole, and a tray of dinner rolls she made at 5 in the morning because she woke up early and had nothing else to do. Diane said, "That looks really nice, Amber," and then quietly moved the charcuterie board slightly to the left so there would be room for the pies. My younger son is Kevin. He is 36, an electrician, built like a man who does actual work with his body, and married to Diane, who I would trust with my life or my kitchen, whichever needed more urgent attention. Their kids, my grandchildren Caleb and Sophie, were already in the backyard attempting to locate the Easter eggs I had hidden at 7 that morning, which meant I had approximately 30 minutes before Sophie found the one I had put in the gutter by mistake. Nathan was in the living room. He was 40 years old, same height as me. My hands, my jaw, the same way of going quiet when something was wrong. He had owned a landscaping business for 6 years. He had built it himself, which I respected, and he had watched it contract quietly over the past year and a half, which I knew about, and which almost no one else did. I knew because Nathan had told me. He had driven the 45 minutes to my house on a January evening 10 months ago and sat at the same kitchen table with a cup of coffee he didn't drink, and told me that he was behind on 2 car payments, carrying a balance on 3 credit cards he couldn't clear, and that the business had lost its 2 largest commercial contracts in the same month. He told me all of this in a flat, steady voice, the voice of a man who has been rehearsing a conversation for weeks and is finally just relieved to be saying it out loud. He did not ask me for help. He told me that specifically. He said, "Dad, I'm not here asking for anything. I just needed to say it to someone." I told him I would cover the car payments for now. He told me he couldn't accept that. I told him I wasn't asking. That is how things work between us. That is how things have always worked between us, actually, which is one of the reasons Nathan and I have always gotten along better than Nathan and anyone else, with the occasional exception of Diane, who gets along with everyone. Here is what Nathan did not tell Amber. I want you to hold that sentence for a moment because everything that follows sits on top of it. He did not tell Amber because, as I would understand later, Nathan had built his identity around being the provider, the one who figured things out. The one Amber had married when she was 28, and he was 33, and he had a growing business and a confidence about the future that she had found, in her own words, magnetic. He could not find a way to tell her that the magnetic man had lost his pull, and so instead of telling her, he borrowed time. From me, specifically, to the tune of $1,040 a month, every month, for 10 months. Amber did not know any of this. On this particular Easter Sunday, she walked into the dining room with the look she sometimes gets, a look I had cataloged over 7 years, the look that meant she had been wanting to say something for a while and was now locating her moment. I have learned to identify this look the way a sailor learns to identify a particular kind of cloud. Not with panic, just with attention. We sat down. I said grace. Kevin said amen before I finished, which he has done since he was 8 years old, and I have long since accepted I cannot change. Nathan poured wine. Diane passed the rolls. Sophie came in from the backyard holding a fistful of plastic eggs and a grass stain on her dress that was going to require a specific conversation between her and Diane at some later point. Caleb came in behind her looking suspicious, which usually means he had already opened his eggs and eaten the candy, and was now attempting to appear as though this had not happened. We were 20 minutes into dinner. The ham was good. The conversation was the usual orbit of nothing in particular. Kevin and Nathan talked about the Braves. Diane and I talked about the garden, which she has been helping me with since Margaret died, because she knows I like the company more than I like the actual gardening. Sophie asked if she could have the rest of her Easter candy for dinner instead of dinner, and was told she could not, and accepted this with the resigned dignity of someone who knew the answer before asking, but felt the question deserved to be on the record. And then Amber set her fork down. She set it down the way people set things down when they've made a decision. Not carelessly. Deliberately. You know, she said, her voice carrying just enough to reach everyone at the table without quite being loud. I've been thinking about something. Kevin looked up. Diane looked at her plate. Nathan went very still, in the particular way Nathan goes. Still when something is happening that he cannot stop. Nathan works so hard, Amber continued. Her tone was almost conversational, the way someone sounds when they're explaining a thing they find obvious. He really does. He always has. I just sometimes wonder. And here she paused, glanced around the table, found her landing spot somewhere between me and the centerpiece. If growing up with a father who never really gave him much encouragement might be part of why he second-guesses himself so much. The table went quiet, not the gentle quiet of a lull in conversation. The other kind. The kind that has a sound of its own. A held breath that fills the room the same way water fills a glass, completely, and from every direction at once. Kevin put his fork down. Diane's eyes went to me and then immediately back to her plate, with the focused concentration of a woman who was making rapid decisions about how uninvolved she planned to be in whatever this was becoming. Sophie looked between the adults, the way children do when they sense something large moving through the room. Caleb had stopped pretending about the candy. Nathan did not look at me. He looked at his plate. He picked up his wine glass. He put it back down without drinking from it. He did not look at me. I want to stop here for a moment, because I have thought about this since Easter Sunday, and I have thought about it the way you think about a photograph you keep finding at the back of a drawer, turning it over, looking at it again, putting it back. The dinner. My response, what happened in the weeks that followed. But when I returned to it again and again, I always returned to this, my son sitting 12 inches away from me, and choosing to look at his plate. There is a particular kind of hurt that I do not have a clean word for. It is not anger, it is older than anger, and sits deeper. It is the hurt of watching someone you love, someone who came from you, choose silence when silence costs you something. Nathan is 40 years old. He is not a cruel man, but he sat there and he looked at his plate, and that said more to me in 4 seconds than anything Amber said in the 10 seconds before it. I sat with it. I reached over and picked up my wine glass slowly, without any drama, and I held it. I looked at Amber. She had the expression of someone who had expected a reaction and was not entirely comfortable with the one she was getting, which was no reaction at all. Amber, I said very calmly, in the same tone I would use to ask her to pass the salt. Can I ask you something? She blinked. Sure. How would you feel? I said, setting the glass down gently. If you found out tonight, not tomorrow, not next week, that the car you drove here in wasn't actually yours? Nobody moved. What? Amber said. If you went to get in your car after dinner, I continued, holding her gaze without any particular expression on my face, and discovered that it had never really been paid for, that the payments on it, every single one for the past 10 months, had been made by someone else entirely, without your knowledge. How would that feel? The laugh she had been holding evaporated. She looked at Nathan, and Nathan, my son, my 40-year-old broad-shouldered, stubborn, deeply private son, looked the way a man looks when the last door in a hallway he has been locking one by one finally opens on its own. Not surprised. Terrified. The face of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment and had never once been ready for it. "Dad," Nathan said. Low. A single word with about 4 different meanings inside it. "I'm just making conversation," I said pleasantly, and picked my wineglass back up. Kevin cleared his throat as if he were trying to dislodge something from his windpipe. Diane said, very quietly and almost to herself, "Does anyone want more green beans?" Sophie, God bless her, said, "I do." And Diane served her green beans with the serene efficiency of a woman who had decided she was going to be extremely focused on green beans for the foreseeable future. Amber was still looking at me. The performance she carried everywhere she went, that particular arrangement of confidence and presentation, was gone. In its place was something I did not expect to see on her face. Something that looked less like embarrassment and more like genuine fear. Not the caught being rude kind. The real kind. The kind that meant she already knew, somewhere below the surface of every conversation she'd had for the past several months, that something was off. That the numbers weren't quite adding up. That the man she had married, who had always been the one who figured things out, had been quiet in a different way lately than he had ever been quiet before. She already knew something was wrong. She just didn't know what she knew. I had just confirmed that there was something to know. Nathan did not look at his plate again. He looked at the window above the sink. At nothing in particular. The way you look when you are doing calculations that have nothing to do with math. I finished my wine. Outside, the April afternoon was turning gold and slow the way it does on good Easter Sundays, and for a moment the whole thing seemed very still, like the world itself was waiting to see what happened next. Kevin, bless him, started talking about the Braves again. Nobody followed him into that conversation, but he kept going, gamely, like a man rowing a boat by himself, and choosing not to comment on the absence of the other oars. Here is something nobody prepares you for when you are carrying a secret for someone you love. It does not become easier with time. It becomes heavier and heavier in a specific way. The way wet wood is heavier than dry wood, not because it has grown larger, but because it has absorbed everything around it. Every dinner. Every phone call. Every time Amber talked about a vacation they were planning or a piece of furniture they were looking at, and I sat there with the weight of knowing that the floor under all of it had been paid for by a wire transfer from my account to a payment portal on the 14th of every month. I had made my peace with the money. That was never the issue. Nathan is my son. I would have spent twice that without a second thought if I believed it was helping him. The question I had been sitting with for 10 months was not whether to help. It was whether helping him hide it was actually helping him at all. I was awake at 5:45 the next morning. I am always awake early. I have been an early riser since my 30s, since the years when getting ahead of the day felt like a survival strategy. Margaret used to say I acted like sleep was something that could be stolen from me if I wasn't watchful. She was not entirely wrong. I like to see things coming. I like to be standing up when they arrive. My phone rang at 7:12. It was Nathan. He skipped hello entirely, which told me everything about how the night had gone. "What were you doing yesterday?" he asked me. His voice was rough from the way of a man who had not slept and was not going to pretend otherwise. "I was having Easter dinner with my family," I said. The ham turned out well, I thought. The green beans were excellent. "Dad," Nathan. A silence stretched between us. I heard him exhale, that long, slow breath he has been doing since he was a teenager, since the years when he needed a moment to collect himself before saying something he had thought about too long. I know that breath the way I know his face. There are sounds a father memorizes without trying to. "She's asking questions," Nathan said. "I imagine she is. I need you to just know," I said, quietly, but once, the way I say things I mean completely. "Nathan, I have done everything you asked me to do for 10 months. I kept my mouth shut. I watched you hold the roof up with both hands and tell yourself you just needed a little more time. I transferred money every month because you are my son and I love you, and also because I believed you were about to fix this yourself. I was wrong about that. A long pause. The car payments, I said. 2 of them. 10 months. The credit card minimums you couldn't cover in March. The insurance renewal in November that you mentioned once and never mentioned again, but that I paid because I was paying attention when you thought I wasn't. That is what she doesn't know. I heard something on his end I think he hadn't planned for me to hear. A sharp breath. Almost. I'm not calling to collect, I told him. I want you to understand that clearly. The money is gone and I made my peace with it. But Nathan, I cannot keep standing behind a wall you built so you wouldn't have to have an honest conversation with your own wife. That ends now. This month. Another long pause. I waited. She's going to be furious, he said. Yes, I agreed. She probably will be. And then she is going to ask you why. And you are going to have to tell her the real answer. Not the business cycle answer. Not the market conditions answer. The real one. He went quiet again. Okay, Nathan said. Just that. The word was barely a word, more like air leaving a space that had been pressurized for a very long time. Okay, I said back. We stayed on the line together for a few minutes without either of us saying much. I drank my coffee. Outside, a cardinal landed on the feeder Margaret had put up 12 years ago, and that I had maintained ever since, not because I particularly followed birds, but because it was there, and she had liked it and keeping it filled, like doing something small and right. He told her on a Wednesday. Kevin called me Thursday morning to tell me that Nathan had called him first, looking for something, he wasn't sure what, maybe just to say it to someone else before he said it to Amber. Kevin told him gently that this was not a situation Kevin could step into, that it needed to be between Nathan and Amber, and, eventually, between Nathan and me. Kevin said he was proud of himself for that call, and asked if I was proud of him too. I told him I was, genuinely. Diane apparently made him a sandwich immediately after, which in their household is the highest expression of approval available. Nathan sat Amber down and told her everything. I know this because Amber called me on Thursday evening at 8:47. I had been expecting the call. I had not been certain about the tone of it. I prepared myself for anger, which I felt she was entitled to. Instead, when she spoke, her voice was quiet. Completely stripped of the arrangements and presentations I had watched her maintain for 7 years. Just her voice, small and direct. How long? She asked me. 10 months, I said. Why didn't you tell me? Because he's my son, I said, and I thought he was about to fix it. I waited longer than I should have, and I am sorry for that. She was quiet. I could hear her breathing, the specific rhythm of someone processing information that reorganizes everything they believed about their own life. I have heard that rhythm before. It is not a comfortable sound. Are we going to lose the cars? She asked. Just like that. No softening, no preamble, direct and clear, asking the question that was actually underneath all the other questions. Not if we deal with this clearly and quickly, I said, and I think you are capable of dealing with things clearly and quickly. A pause. Why would you say that? Because the version of you that called me right now, I said honestly, is asking better questions than the version of you at dinner yesterday. That matters. She didn't answer that right away. I owe you an apology, she said finally, about what I said at dinner, about you and Nathan. You do, I agreed. Not unkindly. Just honestly. I shouldn't have said it. No, I said. You shouldn't have. I said, you shouldn't have. She stopped, started again. I think I'd been frightened for a while, and I didn't know what I was frightened of, and that came out sideways. I thought about that for a moment. That is actually one of the more self-aware things I have ever heard you say, I told her. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite. I need to understand the actual numbers, she said. Not what Nathan tells me are the numbers, the real ones. I can help with that, I said, if Nathan is willing. He will be, she said, with a certainty that told me something had shifted between them. Not everything, but something fundamental. Something in the architecture of how they were facing a problem, and more specifically, which direction they were each facing when they did it. I'll make sure he will be. We hung up at 9:15. I sat in my kitchen for a while after that. The house was quiet in the way it always is now in the evenings. A quiet I have mostly made my peace with over the years, though there are still moments when it has a texture to it that I notice. I thought about Easter Sunday. The ham, Kevin's determined attempt to discuss the Braves into an indifferent silence. Sophie in the grass-stained dress. The Easter egg in the gutter that, as it turned out, Caleb had located and pocketed without telling anyone. A detail I discovered approximately 4 days later, and which I have to admit I respected. I thought about Amber's voice on the phone, the way it sounded without the performance underneath it. I thought about Nathan. There is something that happens when you raise a child and then watch them become a person. It is not a clean transition. They do not become someone else. They become more of themselves, which means they carry your best qualities and your worst ones into every room they walk into, and there is nothing you can do about it except hope that when the worst ones surface, they have enough of the best ones to balance it. Nathan has my stubbornness, which is a liability. He has my privacy, which under the right conditions becomes a wall that keeps out people who should be let in. But he also has my capacity for honesty when he finally arrives at it. He just sometimes takes the long way there. I drove to their house on Saturday morning, unannounced. I have found in my 67 years that some conversations are best had before anyone has organized their thoughts into a position they intend to defend. It was a gray morning, the kind of gray that feels considered rather than accidental, as if the sky had reviewed its options and chosen restraint. Their house was a brick colonial on a cul-de-sac, 2 doors down from a neighbor who had a collection of lawn ornaments that had always struck me as ambitious. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment. Margaret would have been here weeks ago, I thought. She would have driven the 45 minutes the morning after that Easter dinner, brought something from the bakery, sat in their kitchen, and found the exact right thing to say without appearing to be trying. She had a gift for that. The gift of making people feel found instead of cornered. I have always been better at the cornering. I got out of the truck. Nathan opened the door. He had clearly been awake for a while, coffee in hand, hair not quite settled into the day yet. He looked at me with the expression of a man who is surprised but understands on some level that he shouldn't be. "I didn't know you were coming," he said. "I know," I said. That was the point. He stepped aside. Amber was at the kitchen table with a laptop open and several pieces of paper arranged in front of her in a pattern that told me she had been working on something with intention. She looked up when I came in, and the expression on her face was different from any expression I had seen on it in 7 years of Easter dinners and Christmases and the various performances that had occupied the space between us. She looked like herself, whoever that actually was, underneath everything else. "Lucas," she said. "Amber," I said back. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from both of them. "Okay," I said. "Let's actually look at this." Nathan sat. Amber turned the laptop slightly so I could see the screen. She had built a spreadsheet. Monthly obligations in one column, current balances in another, a third column I initially took for projections that turned out, on closer inspection, to be a list of things they could eliminate. The gym membership. 2 streaming services. The grocery delivery that was costing them $60 a month more than simply going to the grocery store. I looked at it for a long moment. "You did this yourself?" I asked her. "Last night," she said. "And this morning." "This is good work," I said. And I meant it. She looked at me the way people look when they receive a compliment they weren't certain they had earned and aren't entirely sure what to do with. Not deflecting. Just still. Taking it in. Nathan put a piece of paper on the table. I recognized it as a printed summary of what he had told me 10 months ago, updated with current figures, as close to the full truth of his finances as I suspected he had ever put in writing. He pushed it toward me. His hand was steady. "This is everything," he said. I looked at it. I looked at him. "I know," I said. "Nathan, I already knew most of this." He nodded. "I know you did. I needed you to say it anyway." He nodded again, slowly. "I know." There is something that happens in a room when people stop negotiating with the truth and simply sit in it. The room itself seems to change, not smaller exactly, more honest. The table feels more solid under your hands. The light comes in differently. I have only experienced it a handful of times in my life, and every time it has been in a kitchen. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything, the actual numbers, the realistic timeline, the specific things that needed to change and in what order. Amber asked questions that were direct and sensible. Nathan answered them without the careful management I had watched him apply to every difficult conversation for as long as I had known him as an adult. There were moments where it was uncomfortable. There were moments where neither of them looked at each other because they were both looking at a number that represented something that hurt. I did not smooth those moments over. They didn't need smoothing. They needed sitting in. At some point, Amber got up and made more coffee without asking if anyone wanted it, and brought 3 cups back without ceremony. I thought about the charcuterie board with the 12 grapes and the unrecognizable cheese, presented with both hands, stepped back from like a painting. This was better. The coffee, the spreadsheet, the honest quiet. Before I left, Amber stopped me at the door. She said it plainly, looking at me directly. "I am sorry," she said, "for what I said at Easter. About you and Nathan. It wasn't true and it wasn't fair, and I said it because I was scared and I didn't know how to say that, and I aimed it at you instead, and you didn't deserve that." I looked at her for a moment. "No," I said. "I didn't. I know. But I appreciate you saying so," I said. "I didn't. I know. But I appreciate you saying so," I said. That took something. She held my gaze. "You covered for us for 10 months. I did. I don't know how to. You don't need to," I said. "Handle the spreadsheet. Take care of each other. That's all I want." She nodded once. Clearly, the nod of someone who intends to follow through. I drove home the same way I came, through the gray morning and the 45 minutes of highway that had always been the exact right distance between my life and Nathan's. I thought about Margaret. I thought about the journal with every Easter dinner recorded in her handwriting. I thought about how she would have handled all of this. The warmth she would have brought to the kitchen table that I had tried to approximate with honesty, which is a different thing, though sometimes it lands in the same place. I thought about Amber's voice on Thursday night and in the kitchen this morning, the version of her underneath the presentation. I thought about Nathan's hand, steady on the paper. I thought about what I had said to Nathan on the phone Friday morning, that the job of a father is not to protect his child from the weight of their own choices. That the job, as best as I have ever understood it, is to make sure they don't carry it alone, and then, at a certain point, to make sure they understand that carrying it themselves is the only way it ever actually gets lighter. I pulled into my driveway, went inside, put the coffee on, found Margaret's journal in the drawer where it always is, opened it to no particular page, and read an entry from a spring 15 years ago. A small dinner, nothing dramatic, a list of what she cooked and who was there, and one line at the end about how Nathan had helped her set the table and had, unprompted, folded the napkins into triangles because he thought it looked nicer. I thought about that for a while. 6 months later, Nathan called to tell me they had made both car payments on their own. He said it quickly, in the middle of a conversation about something else, as if he had been planning to mention it casually, and then found, when the moment arrived, that casual was not quite how it came out. His voice had a quality to it I had not heard in a long time. Not relief, exactly. Something more like arrival. Like a man who had been a long way from somewhere and had finally gotten back. "Good," I said. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah," he said. "Nathan. Yeah. Your mother would have been proud of you for this," I said. "I want you to know that." A pause. Long enough that I thought I might have miscalculated. "Thanks, Dad," he said. His voice had changed. Just slightly. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular. The Braves. The garden. Whether Kevin was ever going to get around to repairing the fence he had promised to fix in February. Normal things. The noise that a table full of people sounds like when they love each other. I put the phone down on the kitchen counter and sat in the quiet of the house for a moment. The quiet that still has a texture to it sometimes. The kind that reminds you of everything that isn't there. And then I went outside to fill the bird feeder because it was getting low, and it was a nice afternoon, and because some things you just keep doing. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe. There are more stories where this came from, and they keep coming as long as you keep showing up. Thank you for being here. Genuinely.